Hi, and welcome to the second episode of the Alexa podcast. Our guest today is John Kelvie of Bespoken. John, say hello.
Hi, nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, thank you for sharing some of your time with us, and we'll get into what you do and learn about Bespoken in just a minute. Before we do that, a shout out to our two sponsors. The Alexa Conference is the annual gathering of Alexa developers and enthusiasts. You can learn more and get registered at alexaconference.com. And our other sponsor is Fourthcast, Fourthcast. Fourthcast turns your podcast into a custom Alexa skill. Get started at fourthcast.com. John, thank you very much for joining us. We greatly appreciate you and you being willing to share some of your time with us. Let's get started by you simply explaining to us and the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into working with Bespoken.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks a lot for having me on. It's a pleasure. So I've actually been working in interactive audio since 2013. I was one of the co-founders of Zap Media. We were doing interactive audio ads for mobile. And so, the simple example I'd always give was if you're listening to a music app or a podcasting app, our ads would come on and they'd say, you can get 2 pizzas for $10 if you just say call now. And you as the listener could turn around and say call now. And, then you get your pizza, right? And really neat application of speech recognition. We're building that all on the mobile side. And we were we were in this voice-first world even a few years ago, because if you're working with music apps or some type of other audio app, people typically were actually just listening to it in their pocket. They had their phone in their pocket, they're listening to it in the background. And, the only mechanism for interaction was that audio. So we really became accustomed to working with that sort of user experience. And when the Alexa device came out, or the Echo device came out with Alexa, it was immediately really interesting to us. We started building skills for it. And as we were building them, we saw that the development tools, or I quickly saw that the development tools really were just not there yet. And that was the genesis for Bespoken, is that we saw for this new paradigm, voice-first development, AI-based development, and also the fact that it's just it's a slightly different whole deployment model that it uses, that you needed a new set of tools to manage it. And we created Bespoken based on that.
So you've got the one tool, and by the way, the website is bespoken.tools, BESPOKEN.tools, for those listening who want to check this out while you're listening. So I'm not a developer. Kevin will be asking you the questions about that, but where are you going with this? How are you going to monetize these tools?
Yeah. So, we started out, the first things that we put out there were some command line tools that are really helpful. We built this thing that we call the proxy that basically allowed you to directly interact with Alexa on your laptop. It really shortened the development and debugging lifecycle. And that stuff is open source and it's free. But then what we've built out is we have a logging capability that you can access now. We're adding monitoring to that to ensure the quality of your skills. And then we're adding these other features sort of related to monitoring that we refer to as validation, that do even a deeper level, and it's really tailored to voice. And for those features, we charge people basically, it's free up to a certain number of transactions, and then if you get to a very high number, then we start to charge you a sort of modest fee for that. So that's
and you're
how
doing
we
that
built
already?
the business around it. We've added those features. We haven't started charging anyone yet. It's still all free at this point.
Okay, I'm here to ask you the dumb questions, so that's I'm
Oh yeah,
happy to do
sure.
that. Um, Kevin, what questions you got?
Yeah, so I'm interested in the tools you have. Can you? I see that as you mentioned, the proxy. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And for those that aren't really familiar with what that could be doing, could you explain in detail how you're able to uh, you know proxy requests to Alexa and
I mean, the proxy tool is really neat, and I think just in sort of introducing this, I said, we saw that it was a new paradigm for development, and so I came from this mobile background, and with mobile, you had an immense amount of flexibility in how you built your apps. And that was great, but that was also a real problem because you're running on the device. It's a highly complex API. There's lots of things that can go wrong. It's stuff that can go wrong with your code, with the configuration on the phone, with something with the operating system. Um, much less if you're building for both iOS and Android. Just within each of their universes, there's this immense complexity. Um, there's this switch now, right, with Alexa where you're not running on the device, you're not running on the Echo if you're building skills. Um, you're not even running like inside of Alexa. Instead, you're a server that's just sitting somewhere out there in the cloud, and the Alexa service sends you requests, and then it sends you a request saying the user said such and such, basically, and you respond and say, well, tell them this or play this audio, and show them this card, and you can do some other things as well, but that's basically what it comes down to. And it's a really neat development model, but it also introduces this basic challenge, which is that if you want to be able to test your skills, you need to have a server that Alexa can send requests to. And people don't develop on servers, they develop on their laptops. So what we do with the proxy is we actually build a tunnel from your laptop to a public server that we've created at Bespoken, and the requests from Alexa go to our server, and then we in turn send them down to your laptop. So it's kind of a neat networking trick. It sort of feels like magic, um, but it makes your life as a developer much easier because you're not going through these cycles where you make a little change to your code and then you deploy it back out to your server, and then you see that something's still not working quite right, and then you make another change and then you deploy it again. And those cycles really slow you down, and so that tool is immensely helpful in terms of accelerating people's development.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly something that I've run into, and I did have kind of some flashbacks to the local tunnel solutions that we've solved for general web development or mobile development to your mobile devices, something like that. That's on the same network. So that's awesome that you guys have that for Alexa. I see also that you have a speak and an intend command line tool that appears to be a fit for updating your intents in the Alexa developer. I'm sorry, in the Amazon developer portal. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so that's what we were doing with those. That's actually based on an emulator that we have. And so we built an emulator of the Alexa that mimics its internals. And like when you say speak, it actually takes whatever you say and it creates a proper JSON payload, very similar to what Alexa would send to you, and then it sends it to your skill. And so it's a really neat tool for testing it. On top of it, that emulator that we use for those commands, you can actually use that programmatically to do unit tests, to hook it into a continuous integration process. It's meant to be something that you can start off with a little bit of debugging, but then if you want to build some really industrial grade development processes, you can leverage it to do that.
That's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about how close that speak technology is to what's actually running on Alexa, and if so, like how are you accomplishing that? Because Alexa really isn't open source, so I'm interested to I guess to know that if I'm using that tool as I develop my skill, that once I put it into production in Alexa, that I'm not going to have any unexpected issues.
Yeah, that's a great question. We develop it based on the APIs that Amazon publishes. So we're conforming to the JSON payloads that they have. And that part of it is pretty straightforward. That's well documented, and we know what values should go into each field. Sometimes people will put a bug into GitHub and they'll say, hey, this field's not quite right, or did you know that they added this extra field? And we make small tweaks for that. And, that's really pretty straightforward. And I think you can use the payloads that come from that with a high degree of confidence. Now, I will say one additional thing we did do with it was we actually mimicked the behavior of the audio player, which that was probably, it works great. That was an ambitious thing to take on. In building that, we were doing some reverse engineering, because the audio player, if you use that API from Amazon, it's just, there's a bit more going on. It's firing off events at different points, and there's some issues around timing. So I was really studying that very carefully and putting together, emulating that, and it works great. But at the same time, I do fear like there'll be some updates, and it'll be harder for us to keep that in line. But so far, it has worked great for us, and it's really been invaluable for unit testing, podcasting skills, music skills that we have.
Certainly, yeah, I can see how that just to. I guess what I was thinking before was that you may have you may have been able to duplicate what the Alexa voice service portion of Alexa is doing, but just matching JSON payloads is a huge leap forward from a developer standpoint. So major kudos on delivering that.
Well, thank you, and I should also just mention, this is something that we're just putting out there, is that we're starting to build testing tools around AVS, and the way in which we've manifested this initially was this is just kind of a fun thing you can check out. It's called silentecho.bespoken.io, and right now it's just like a fun web interface. You type something in, and we basically we turn it into speech based on what you type. We send it to Alexa. Alexa does whatever it would normally do with that speech, and then it sends back a reply, which we then in turn we turn into text. And that's like, why did we build that as a web interface? I just thought it was kind of a fun thing. But we plan on using that to augment our testing tools as well, and that's really, I think, going to be super valuable.
Yeah, can you talk a bit about the testing tools? That's something that as soon as I've looked at what you guys have started building, that really caught my eye, because I'm a developer, and my tests are extremely valuable, tests that others have written. Can you talk a bit about it looks like it's the BST Alexa bit of the library?
Yeah, and so that's the emulator that I was referring to, and that's the piece that actually, you can say speak, you can say intend, and that's going to generate the proper JSON, send it to your skill, and then even send events if you're using the audio player interface. So it's really pretty nifty, and we do see what we're pushing towards next, where there it's an emulator, which has its place in things. We want to augment that additionally by really tying into the actual AVS, so that we're calling and not everybody's probably familiar with what AVS is that's listening to this, but that's actually the low level, that's the API for devices. So that's going to interact with the actual Alexa service. And so there's no emulation. What your skill is going to receive when we're using that is the exact payload. So it's like an extra level of assurance if you're using that for testing.
That's awesome. I can see as I'm developing how that would be extremely valuable to have that feedback really quick, because I've developed some very simple skills that do not require the volley of conversation that you find yourself once you start building something bigger. You naturally gravitate to that because Alexa receives such small bits of audio from the user, and I can see that this emulator is just super valuable for that. Can you talk about the BST encode?
Yeah, so our encoder is pretty neat. That's been less well used. I'm glad you asked about that. I think I'm the main one that's using that. But if you want to do, one of the things that we're big fans of, right, is we think people should use produced audio. So that's a user experience perspective that we have. I mean, the Alexa, the text-to-speech there, and the Alexa voice is great. It's definitely improved leaps and bounds over where text-to-speech was, 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. But it still sounds better if you record things in a real voice. I mean, you get all the pronunciations right. You don't run into those some of the weird phrasing you can sometimes get with text-to-speech. In addition, we think produced audio is neat just because it gives you a chance to give things a personality. And so it's just a nice way to differentiate your skills. And so what the encoder does is it makes it easier to do that, because it'll not just, it encodes any audio file to the correct format so that it can be used by Alexa, and then puts it out on the S3, which is Amazon's large file hosting service, so that it's accessible for use in an Alexa skill. And it can be used programmatically, so you can do it on the fly. So to give you an example of where we use something like that, we had an Alexa skill, a podcasting skill, where we wanted to basically take a short snippet from every podcast, like an introduction, and then just automatically take that part and put it into something that you would play as an introduction. And that allowed us, you didn't have to do anything ahead of time. You didn't have to go and do it yourself and then upload it. Instead, it would just know to look at a certain URL, encode it in a flash, and then make it available so that you could be dynamically updating the audio as you went along. It's really helpful. At the same time, I think people are still kind of, most people are still using the Alexa voice, and they're sort of catching on to the utility of using the sort of recorded audio.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on the fact of pre-recorded audio. It's night and day when you have the Alexa voices read things, and then you have something that's been professionally produced, or even, well, it doesn't even have to be professionally produced. A human can read it, and the I don't know, my interest in the skill goes up 100-fold just by having that human touch. But the encode library that you've got, it's actually extremely valuable because, like you said, bundling that stuff and getting it out on a server, it's just cumbersome to home roll that every single time you have to do something. So, and it looks like these tools. Is that tool a command line tool, or is it a library you can build around?
It's a library you can build around. It's awesome. Meant to be used programmatically.
Awesome. No, that's really, really awesome.
All right, John, I got a question for you. And I'll take this a little bit of a different direction, and this will probably take us to the end. So I'm curious, in a podcast we recorded earlier this week, the second episode of the Voice First Roundtable, it was discussed whether the future would be one assistant to rule them all, or a universe of a lot of different assistants. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that. And just to make the just to come from the standpoint of a business person, I run a business called Score Publishing, and we're going to want to develop some Alexa skills, or we're going to want to develop some voice skills. Let's say I come to you and I say, all right, John, I know you're developing these tools that are used for voice technology, and you're very knowledgeable in this space. How would you advise me if I came to you? What would you tell me to do? Develop for one particular platform, or develop for them all and just budget whatever is appropriate? Or how do you look at that, and how do you think it's going to reconcile itself?
Oh, I mean, first of all, when you ask that question, it makes me think of all the times people were asking me that on the mobile side. And I always thought I knew the right answer, and it'd be like, oh, you should go HTML5 or try out this cross-platform thing. Or no, you have to be native for each one. I mean, the answer from myself and from our industry sort of kept changing. And so, take what I say here with a grain of salt. But I do think right now, where it's early on, we don't know who the winners are going to be. Amazon has an early lead, seemingly, but Google is putting out compelling products. Microsoft is moving into the industry. Apple at some point might do something. So I think, depending on your audience and what you're trying to achieve, I would build for at least Amazon and Google. And there's not good cross-platform tooling at this point, but I'm optimistic that we'll see some soon, so that essentially you can take one code base and deploy it effectively to both platforms. Just recently, some people were showing me, I think, what looked like a very promising cross-platform toolkit. And, the nature of, apps for voice at this point is such that they're not that complicated. And I think there is a good opportunity for people to basically give you a layer that allows you to build it once and run it on multiple platforms. And that's going to be great for folks that want to quickly build skills and don't want to have to worry about learning multiple platforms really in depth.
I have this very vivid memory, and thank you for that answer. I have this very vivid memory of reading an article years ago in which the author was in the entertainment space, was arguing vehemently that there wasn't going to be a winner between Blu-ray and HD DVD, that they were going to always both coexist. And and for whatever reason, that's what is in the back of my mind when I look at Amazon and Google and Microsoft and Apple. I mean, I think the upside is, part of the upside is pretty obvious. These are four massive companies that have significant trust established in the marketplace, which is absolutely necessary for this technology and what you're asking people to do. Put devices in their home that could potentially listen all the time and all this sort of thing. But the downside clearly is that they're all 1,000-pound gorillas that are used to bossing everybody else around, and so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It's always good to ask somebody who is knee deep in all of it how they think it will work out.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think the rate of innovation is amazing. Two things that I would highlight, Amazon is putting out all these incredible new products. It's kind of hard to keep up with them, but the Echo Show just looks amazing. I can't wait to get my hands on that. The ability to not just have the voice but also the video, I think, is going to be incredible. And then, meanwhile, Google at the same time, they're really pushing down this path where they're bringing together assistants and assistant apps on a single platform, for both voice and texting. which is like, that's pretty amazing, right? And these are big changes for developers and for users and for everybody that I think it's going to take, I mean, they're just all basically kicking up a lot of dust, and it's going to take some time for it to settle and to really see where it falls out.
For people who have heard this podcast, who are listening now, or just in the process of listening and taking in this discussion, and they want to reach out to you, John, and continue the conversation, learn more about Bespoken, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I'm on Twitter, JPK BST. That's an easy way to reach me. My email is jpk@bespoken.tools. I would also just mention, there's a very vibrant Slack community for voice development. And the Alexa one, I believe, is alexaslack.com. If I have that wrong, just Google Alexa Slack. And that's, if you're interested in development for voice, I mean, you go in there, you can really learn a lot. I'm in there all the time. It's easy to get a hold of me there, and also other folks that I would say are probably even more expert than myself in it. There's just a lot of great resources out there.
Thank you very much for setting the time aside. Thank you for sharing your time and your perspective with us. We appreciate it. And for the second episode of the Alexa podcast, thank you for listening. And until next time.